All right, folks, I'm driving home. We're going to ExperiencedDevs subreddit. This topic is about interview anxiety. And I didn't even read the whole post, just kind of skimmed the very top part. And they were saying, hey, does performance anxiety for interviews, does that ever go away? And so, obviously, I literally cannot answer this universally for every single person because that would be a bunch of shit, but I'll talk about it from my perspective at least. So just a friendly reminder, if you have questions you want answered on the channel about career development, software engineering, that sort of stuff, leave them below in the comments or go to codecommute.com. Submit stuff anonymously that way. Happy to try my best to answer. And thanks so much for folks for submitting stuff because that's the whole reason the channel exists. Okay, short answer is for me, no. The anxiety does not ever go away. The end. But in all seriousness, I think that for myself, I have a lot of anxiety around like testing in general. So interviews are one example of that. I've talked about this before, but like even I've always found like any type of test, like quizzes in elementary school or exams in, high school and university, I always felt like an incredible amount of anxiety going into that kind of stuff. Also like self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing where it's like, I'm anxious. It's like something you don't do often. Like this is a bit of a spoiler alert for where I'm headed with this conversation, but it's something you don't do often. And then I have anxiety about not doing it or having to do it, I guess. And then like, because I don't want to do poorly. And then like having the anxiety means I don't perform as well as I would like to. And then like I have more anxiety about it next time, right? That kind of thing. But this has happened with, I can literally, remember being in classrooms and it's like pop quiz. And I'm like, oh my God, like my life is about to end. Like I hate everything about this. Or, in university having to study for exams, same type of thing. And I knew they were coming, right? And interviews, it's even like anxiety leading up to it. And then, even like an hour before the interview, like I'm pacing. I'm like, nothing about this feels good. And it's interesting because like, I don't feel like I didn't prepare for these types of things, like for interviews. I'm like, I'm going to put in the prep work. As an engineering manager, I have to obviously, do really well on behavioral interview parts. That includes like how to lead and grow teams, how to do performance management, how to navigate, projects of different scope, ones that were successful, failed. I do have to do system design type questions. I do have to do, unfortunately, like lead code style questions. Why? Don't ask me. That's just how this shit goes. I don't think it's a smart thing to do, but I don't make the rules apparently. So, I prepare for these types of things. It means I have to put a lot more effort into things like lead code. Some of the more like behavioral stuff comes a little bit more naturally to me just because it's like, it's just what I'm doing a lot more of. So I still, do practice questions. I still like rehearse things. I still make my lists, like think about the different scenarios that I could talk about for different types of things. So I still do all that prep work. But I have a lot of anxiety going into those things, and it's sort of always been that way. Even in university when I had internships, having to go interview to be an intern, when I'm at that point, I'm thinking like, okay, well, it's gotta be like almost entirely just because I'm new to this, right? Like I'm an intern, I don't have any experience, like it's just how it is, right? Like, and I'm not saying that you're not allowed to feel like anxious or whatever. Like I definitely think you're allowed to feel whatever you want to feel. But I kind of chalked it up to like, oh, it's just got to be that. Oh, buddy, what are you doing? You got to pick a lane. And then like, I sort of realized like that never really went away for me. And when I reflect on it, it's like, yeah, like quizzes, exams, any type of test, an interview is very much the same thing. I just feel nervous. Now, what's interesting is like, and I said I have a particular angle I think I'm going to talk about this kind of stuff, but if I think about some of the interviews I've been in which ones, like where the anxiety was, like how did that shift, I personally think that most of the anxiety is like leading up to the interview, like right before. So like literally in that last like hour right before the call I have to do. By the way, this doesn't change. If I have like an interview loop with like 5 interviews or 7 interviews, each interview is like the hour before that. So having multiple interviews in an interview loop is like horrible for me. Helpful if in terms of like looking at different, angles of my skill set and stuff, but horrible in terms of anxiety. And I find that, yeah, like that hour going right up to it is the most anxious. Now, if I sort of dissect the interview, definitely my coding questions, I have the most anxiety during. Like the anxiety is there and it stays there, which is kind of ridiculous if I think about it, because I've been programming for like 2+ decades. I code literally every day. I'm filming this as I drive home. I'm going to, hang out with my wife for a little bit because I'm getting home from work. And then I'm going to write some code. And I do this like every day. So the crazy part is like I code every day and I still have a ton of anxiety when I'm doing coding interviews. System design questions, I feel less anxious during them compared to a coding interview, but I still have anxiety. And then behavioral ones, when I start talking, I do actually feel like quite comfortable once I get going. Why? And I think it's just because like that stuff is just, it's almost like naturally just coming out of my face. Because like I said a little bit earlier, like that's what I'm doing all day, every day, are those topics that we discuss. Like, tell me about a project that failed. Like, usually it's me, like the part where I'm hesitating a little bit or having a little bit of anxiety is like, did you already talk about this, or is this the best topic to pick from? It's pretty rare for those ones where I'm like, oh man, I have nothing. I think the most recent one I can recall, or I'm like, I don't think I have a good answer. Like, I'm trying to dissect what they're asked, like truly trying to get out of me. But the question, I'm going to butcher it, I apologize. But it was something along the lines of like, can you tell me about a time where like you had to make a decision really quick with little information? Something like that. And, the business value, or like how do I say that properly? Not the business value. One of the values of the company is like a bias for action, right? So like you don't get into analysis paralysis, bias for action. And so I knew that about the company. And so when I was trying to think of an example of that, I'm like, this is like, I'm starting to panic because I'm like, I don't think I have an example of like what am I going to say? Oh, I just made a decision and didn't think about it. Like, that's not what they're asking me, right? Like that would be kind of silly. And if I did have an example like that, probably don't say it because you're going to look maybe kind of stupid. So like, what do I say, right? And I'm like, well, hold on. Like, my brain's trying to tune into it. And it's like, okay, like what they're actually asking you for, regardless of the exact words that came out of their mouth and what I heard is kind of like, can you tell me about a time where you had to, have a bias for action, right? It's not that you didn't think about it or didn't have any information, but like you had, compared to sort of maybe normal operation, you had limited information and you still needed to move quick because of some urgency, some priority. Okay, like, can I talk about that? So again, trying to like usually I have some scenarios, but if like sometimes there's a little bit of panic that sinks in. But for those types of questions, a little bit more rare. So based on what I just said, it's like I think the reality is that if you're just more and more prepared, and right, that stuff comes more and more naturally to you, then you will have less anxiety around it. I said in every interview, regardless of what type it is, leading up to it, I have anxiety, right? Why does that happen? Well, I think it's because I don't interview that often. If I did, I would have a little bit more reinforcement that like, hey, look, like not getting the job is like not a terrible outcome. Sure, it's not, you're not happy about it, but like you didn't die. It's not like the worst thing that's ever happened to you was not getting the job. Like, it's okay. And you know what? Like, there are other opportunities that will come up in the future. I have evidence of that because I have done multiple interviews before, right? So if I kept interviewing and did it more regularly, I'm assuming, and I don't, obviously not from my experience yet, but I think that would improve for me, where my anxiety levels leading up to the actual interview go down, right? I have anxiety, I believe, because it's not something I do often. So that's the performance anxiety leading up to it. Now, if we think about the types of interviews, like I was saying, lead code. I don't do lead code style shit ever. Ever. The only time I do it is if I have to prep for interviews. And I only do it to prep for interviews because that's the only time it's relevant at all in my career. I don't use anything remotely close to that ever in my entire career. So I'm completely out of practice until I need to interview. So if to go back to what this person was asking about, like, for me, it's not going away, but if I wanted to improve it, what I probably should do is practice some lead code when I don't need to be interviewing. I hate the idea of doing that, truly. Like, it really, really bothers me because there is, not many things I would rather spend less time on than lead code. But if that's a requirement when I'm interviewing, it would be probably more wise of me to spend more time on that when I don't have to be interviewing. Because I think that then it would be like, hey, you have tons of examples of doing this when it was a low pressure kind of situation. You've done this before. You might not know the question you're going to get, but you've been through the movements a lot, right? So, shouldn't be that different. Now, that's not to say it's going to eliminate the anxiety, but I think if you can practice this stuff more, you can practice it in a way, like imagine you get a lead code question, and like, I don't know, like if your significant other is not going to hate you, like could you sit down with your significant other and like go through a lead code question and try explaining it to them? My wife would not tolerate that, and I don't blame her, but like that would be even closer to something real. If you have a friend that's a software developer, like could you go bother them to go do that? I think I would probably have no friends left, but maybe that's a strategy to, again, to try and get it closer to the real thing, in this case the interview experience, and practicing it outside of the real thing. And then on system design, I think it's similar. I do spend, from like a technical perspective, I do spend more time talking about what systems look like. But even, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but like I find that sometimes system design interviews can be a little contrived. Like they can kind of feel like they're just setting you up to trick you, which I feel like is stupid. Like what are you trying to accomplish when you're doing that? But I've had, system design interviews where I'm walking through it, like, nervous going into it. Then once we start talking about it, interviewers like, okay, well, what about, like, how would you handle this scenario? Or how does your design navigate, this problem? And so I go to explain it, or I go, hey, you know what, like, it doesn't, like, good call. Here's how I would adjust it. And I feel like I can talk through it. But that's because, again, like if we're doing architectural designs and stuff at work, And even if I'm not the person designing it, I have to be thinking through this with people on my team. Right? Someone's putting together a design for some system, like, cool, I need to be part of that review process with them. What kind of feedback am I looking to give them? And am I just like covering my eyes and saying, good job, like you wrote stuff, like let me check the box? Like, no. Like, what does security look like here? Like, how does this scale? Like all these different things that we have to start talking about depending on what the design is. But again, this is where it gets kind of interesting in terms of experience and coverage, because the reality is the systems and stuff that I'm working on at work, they might be completely different than the stuff that I have to go do in like an interview setting. Right? So, you know, I have not done a payment system, like a distributed system with payments. I've never built that. Could I figure it out? Like, probably. I probably could. Can I, you know, practice that for an interview? Like, yeah, I have to. I have to be prepared to do that. But the only time that I do that, since it's not on the job and it's not what I do as a hobby, is when I'm prepping for an interview. So again, you see the pattern, right? Like, the only time I'm doing this stuff is prepping, and that's not a lot of experience. So I think that's a big contributor to having anxiety around this stuff. So finally getting on the highway here. I'm not going to talk about this for whatever Google says, like the next 50 minutes of driving home in this bullshit. So I will move over a couple lanes and I'll summarize my thoughts here in general. Sorry, it's raining. No one can drive when it's raining, even though it's Seattle. It's dark and it's rush hour. Someone better move over. That's all I have to say, because I gotta get in this fast lane. Let's go. One more. Oh, you want... Nice, we did it. Not yet. Not yet, we didn't. Oh boy. Now we did it. The person in front of me was trying to move into the lane I was in, and they decided, and this is, by the way, what you should not do, they decided to stop in the fast lane to move over. That's how you die. And that's how you get someone else killed too, so don't do that. Okay, to summarize my thoughts on this whole thing is like, I think every individual is going to be different when it comes to anxiety around this stuff. I think some people test really well. I think some people are much more comfortable doing that kind of stuff. I think there are people that they don't mind doing lead code. Right? I hate it. I resent it. I don't want to do it. So I kind of resist it. Am I happy about that? No. I wish that I didn't mind doing it. I just think that it's stupid. I don't think there's value in it. I think it's stupid. And as a side effect, that bites me in the ass when I want to interview, because the whole time, not only am I trying to solve this lead code problem, but I'm sitting there going, this is so dumb. Why am I doing this? So it's not helpful, right? I acknowledge that as much as I don't like lead code. We have to switch lanes because this person's literally stupid. Bye. On the system design stuff, same idea, right? You might be someone who, based on your experience, you're not really building or like responsible for building systems, distributed systems, and like that's okay depending on what your job is. But if you have to interview and you have to answer questions like that, you might be out of practice. So you're practicing for that kind of stuff. If you're doing it more frequently at work, it's going to be a lot more natural. And obviously the same thing with behavioral stuff, right? If you're like a team lead or a tech lead, you're probably in a lot more situations where you're like responsible for projects. Being able to talk about, how do you work with other teams, or like tell me about a time where you had like a conflict with another team. Like that stuff comes up probably a little bit more frequently for you. which is great. Like, you have more experience to draw and more conversations to navigate. So that's really helpful. But, you know, if you don't, you have to practice more and more. And that's kind of the closing thought that I'm just going to leave people with, which is, you already know what I'm going to say, which is like, you got to practice this stuff a lot. And I think probably, you know, one of the best ways to prepare for interviews is to get more interviews. I've heard more people saying this, but like, obviously it's really challenging right now, right? Without a doubt. There's people that are applying for jobs. There's tons of applicants. There's a lot of competition. So it's way easier to just say this than it is like for it to be reality. But if you can get yourself in a position where you can be interviewing, where you don't like, you're not in a position where you have to interview, but you're like, hey, this seems like an interesting job. I would take this opportunity if I got it. If you're in such a position, it's helpful because you get more exposure to the interview process, more practice at it. But I'm not, you know, that's not trivial. I think that's probably a really difficult thing to do right now. But if you're unable to do that, I would say carving out time to practice this stuff, as much as you don't like doing it. Like, I'm kind of saying this for me too, right? Like, if I periodically spent some more time doing lead code, as much as I hate it, probably would help my performance anxiety during interviews. So that's my thoughts on this. I'd be super curious to hear from folks in the comments, if you don't mind sharing, like, what's it like for you? Do you also have anxiety? If you don't, did you do something that like changed that for you? I'd love to know, but my thought is that you got to practice it and get more experience doing it to feel more comfortable. So thank you so much for watching. Again, friendly reminder, questions, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, go to codecommute.com. You can submit questions anonymously. Otherwise, I go to Reddit and I try to look for interesting stuff to talk about. Of course, I got other YouTube channels, so Dev Leaders, where you can check out my C# and programming tutorials. We're trying to do a little bit more AI focus so people can see how to build stuff using AI tools. Dev Leader Path to Tech is where I do resume reviews. You can get your resume reviewed for free when you send it in. And the Dev Leader Podcast is where I interview other software engineers, and I do a live stream every Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific, usually on topics from Code Commute. So if you enjoy this channel, you can check out the live stream and we'll pick a topic and go through it. And I hope to see you there. So thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time.